So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Art Deco Society UK's webinar with Tessa Boase, London's Lost Department Stores, the 30s. We are so excited to have you all with us tonight. So I'm Lucy Inskip, and I'm the Art Deco Society's London rep and your webinar host for this evening. I know that we're all eagerly awaiting Tessa's fascinating talk, but I just have a couple of house rules to go over before we get started. So the first thing to say is that we have auto-generated captions, which are available if you click the CC live transcription button on the bottom of your screen and then show subtitles. The next thing is that this is obviously a webinar format, which is different from a regular Zoom meeting that you might be more used to. For example, you should only be able to see me and Tessa right now, but we can't see or hear you. So feel free to relax without having to worry about the fact that anybody can see you in your pajamas. We'll be following up the presentation today with a short Q&A session, probably about 5 to 10 minutes with Tessa. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask our speaker this evening, please pop it in the Q&A section at any time throughout the talk, and we'll wait until the end to get to them. And that's just at the bottom of your screen as well. And then I'll try and choose some of your lovely questions to ask Tessa at the end, and then she'll do her best to answer them. You may also use the chat function, which is hopefully now enabled for you, if you'd like to share any nice thoughts with the group or raise any issues that you might have with sound or video, as I said at the beginning. But as we say, we'll try and give Tessa time to kind of move through the talk, and we'll save anything else until the end, unless there's anything that we need to raise in between. As always, please be respectful and thoughtful with your questions and comments. So I think that's now it for house rules. You'll be pleased to hear, and we can move on to the part that you've been patiently waiting for. So Tessa is a journalist and social historian whose interests lie in uncovering stories of invisible women from the 19th and early 20th centuries. She's the author of The Housekeeper's Tale, The Women Who Really Ran the English Country House, Etta Lemon, The Woman Who Saved the Birds, and most recently, London's Lost Department Stores, A Vanished World of Dazzle and Dreams. Tessa lectures for the Art Society, the V&A, English Heritage, the National Trust and the RSPB. We are so fortunate to have Tessa with us this evening. Welcome, Tessa. I'm now going to scurry off, turn my mic and camera off, and we'll hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy, and welcome everyone on this gorgeous, warm July evening. Thank you for sacrificing an hour, hopefully to be transported back somewhere rather special. So let me share my screen. And there we go. So yeah, London's Lost Department Stores. This is a book that I began to research just before lockdown because department stores seemed to be closing at a terrible rate. And then, of course, the pandemic really speeded that process up. So it seemed to become absolutely imperative that I put some of these histories down before we lost those cache of memories, the archives, the Debenhams archive. No one even knows where to store that. And I brought to life 50 lost stores around Greater London. I could have done 100. And if we start looking at the whole of Britain, my goodness, the length and breadth of the country, these extraordinary emporia, these cathedrals of consumption, as they were once known, or temples of desire, used to entice people with their fantastic architecture, their goods. They were places where you could literally get anything, as William Whiteley said, from a pin to an elephant. So we've lost 83% of our department stores in the last 7 years. 83%. So this really is a moment to look at what we've lost, but also what we can perhaps preserve architecturally. Today, I'm not going to be just talking about architecture, though. As a social historian, I do really like the stories of people, and they are interwoven with these great stores. So we'll start off with just a whistle-stop tour, some snapshots to get you in the mood of the kind of gifts that department stores in the 30s, the Art Deco age, gave us. So, of course, great architecture. This is drages, and sadly this building was demolished in the last decade. And at the time, 1929, it was said to epitomise the interwar commercial flash of notable excellence, elements of fantasy, surprise, intriguing Gallic gaiety. This was on Oxford Street. Those are the architects of it. Department stores drove innovation, of course, and this is, no prizes for guessing this one, Peter Jones, of course, on Sloane Square by William Crabtree, and it was Britain's first curved glass wall, seemingly supported by itself, because the structure is so delicate, it's so clever, such sort of sleight of hand. Here it is as it goes up. The interiors were just the most sumptuous environments you can imagine. This is Shinner's of Sutton, so it wasn't just Oxford Street, it was literally around the country, but Greater London too, which was trying to rival the attractions of the West End. These are places that you would book for your wedding, your anniversary, for those big important dinners. They were highly aspirational, and every detail was thought about, from the napery to the glassware to the carpet design, the flower arrangements. Every detail, I said, and the interiors, everywhere you looked, with these stores that was remodeled in the 20s and 30s. Every detail had had a slavish amount of attention. This is just a small bit of a balustrade, the Royal Arsenal Cooperative Society in Woolwich, and that sinuous, curvy lettering spells out RACS. So that sort of detail you just find everywhere. The richness of these interiors is extraordinary, and exteriors. I wonder if anyone recognises this. I used to work on Kensington High Street, and every day I would walk down it, never looking up. And when I started researching this book, I went back and I had a jolly good look. This is the outside of Derry and Tons, once was, today M&S. I mean, just look at those architectural details, that metalwork by Walter Gilbert. And you were nothing if you didn't have a roof garden. This was a decade of kind of wild, fairy tale-like ambition. If you dreamt it, you could make it happen. That is what the 30s was all about, was creating these fantasy environments. Again, up on Derry and Tons, and we'll be returning to this store later because it is a classic, a gem. It was an era of extraordinary stunts to try and pull the punters in. All the stores were rivaling each other. When Simpson's opened, and again, we'll be looking in detail at Simpson, it had not one, but 3 light aircraft on display, for which they had to dismantle the doorposts to get them in. Beauty culture was a growing and a big thing as well. Every store had its hair salon, its beauticians, its cubicles. This is when the new D.H. Evans reopened in 1937. It advertised just the latest sprung leather chairs, footrests, silent cubicles, and I'm afraid to say it said it had an all-British staff. And talking of these fantasy environments, this was the decade when children began to be appealed to, shall we say, wooed. They were turned into little consumers, and it all began by creating these kind of playgrounds within department stores for them. This again, D.H. Evans, Peter Pan's playground, with a fountain. Can you imagine the health and safety risk today? While mother went off to get her ankle girth lessened or something in one of those beauty salons. And there was an obsession with all things sporty and speedy, and window displays all too often featured people in bathing attire, bathing costumes, or sporting gear. And similarly with the advertising, the kind of sporty silhouette became very much the thing. I love this advert from John Falconer from Aberdeen. And those models on the left. One of the perhaps most famous sportsmen of his day, very short-lived reign, Edward VIII, where did he get his +4s and his golfing attire? Well, of course he was wearing Dax from Simpson Piccadilly. And increasingly the era was obsessed with menswear. It was changing. And the royals had ever more of a cult around them. Whatever they wore, people were trying to emulate, partly through photography helping this, but also where they shopped. It was sort of slavishly followed what they bought, much as it is today. And yes, an era of women. And it was very hard, I have to say, to find women in this story, because it is a story of great men, at least the way it's told in the official history books. Women beginning to become more than just shop girls or shop assistants, women rising to managerial level. This is the rather formidable Evelyn Whiteside, who started as a buyer in Harrods, very young, 1935, rather beautiful. She then opened up the women's wear section of Simpson Piccadilly, 37, in her 20s. She rose to become the first female director of a West End department store at Fortnum and Mason, where she revolutionized this rather fusty store, introducing high fashion. She was a tough cookie. She was a Scot. She said, "I despise aggressive feminism, especially in the boardroom." And her secret weapon was apparently good grooming. Very much what the 30s was all about, and the 40s and 50s that followed. So we're going to start this tour with a little walk around the West End, going back in time. And let's say we've got the Tube, and all routes seem to lead these days to Piccadilly Circus, right up outside Swan and Edgar. There it is up on the left. The Piccadilly Ticket Hall was opened in 1928, and this was a gorgeous piece of design. I rather like this cross-section. It's a bit like looking at a termite mound in cross-section. These people scurrying, all with shopping on their mind. So up we come. Here is this lovely, sinuous, curving ticket hall, so prefiguring the Art Deco lines and vibe. And we're going to visit first Simpson of Piccadilly. This fabulous store. Now, sadly, it closed in 1999, and some of you will probably know that today you can still visit it, thank goodness. It's Waterstone's flagship store. And it still has retained very much the fixtures and fittings on the interior. Well, largely, you get a sense of a tremendous, solid, impressive and extraordinary building. The man behind this was young Alex Simpson, who took over his father's firm, aged just 30 when his father died, and he had a dream of creating a store just for men. No one had done this before, but he kind of felt it should be possible. His father was a Jewish tailor originally. Alex Simpson was obsessed with menswear, with men's sporting wear. He invented those Dax trousers, had a little bit elastic inside the waist, so when you swung your golf club, your shirt wouldn't pull out of them. And he kind of pulled together the greatest elements of the era, architecturally, interior design, materials in terms of the clothes he was selling and the materials that the store was put together with. Every single detail, he wanted it to scream modernism. And that, I think, is what this store does. His architect was Joseph Pemberton. And this is what Simpson said: endless letters survive, to and fro between him and his architect. He was a total control freak. He was into every detail. I feel very much like the captain of a big new ship, he said, waiting for the pilot in charge of the tugs to get him out of the dock, so I can sail spick and span on my maiden voyage. I think that language is interesting because there was this growing obsession in the 30s with speed, with technology, with modes of transport, ever evolving, exciting modes of transport. So his store is a big ship. Let's just have another quick look at that fabulous store, all lit up like a liner at night. Inside, the interiors were just as surprising, and he had hired from Bauhaus school the great designer Laszlo Moholy-Nagy to do the interiors, kind of things like steam bent plywood and this very sort of modernist pared back design, such a step away from those fussy Edwardian and Victorian department store interiors that were all kind of highly carved dark wood and lots of glass everywhere. This does look and feel modern. The clothes for sale too. Simpson sold the first men's Y-fronts. I think that's quite an interesting fact. No one had dared do that before. They were very much American. So it all began at Simpson. It was, he wanted it to be the greatest menswear store in the West End. And when it opened, well, there was some agreement. These are the kind of fashions that it opened with. This father and son, I mean, talk about young fogey, but this was all the rage in the 30s. Styles to please them both. And the illustrations for all the advertising had this kind of manly vibe to them. One of the newspapers said, whatever may be said about his store, it is a brave adventure. And Nicholas Pevsner described the store as an excellent progressive piece of store design. Here is an architect who handles the new idiom, conviction and personality. Now, tragically, 1 year later, Alex Simpson had died from leukemia. His great big ship had to sail on without him. His brother stepped into his shoes, took it on, opened up the women's wear department, and so it rolled onwards very successfully. So into the war, Simpson got the largest contract to kit out the army. All officers and men, they didn't want just officers like some department store. Grants of Croydon would only kit out officers, for example. So that was a big and juicy contract to land. It had absolutely sealed its reputation as being the go-to place for dapper men's tailoring. So we're going to leave Simpson now. And ladies, I hope you have your fur coats on and your little hats. And we're going to have a little stroll up Regent Street and see what we can see on our way to Oxford Street. So we pass this rather beautiful shop, long gone, Swears and Wells. This is a sort of very early piece. I wonder how you would describe this architecture. It sort of prefigures Art Deco somehow. It's stunning. And this is from the late 20s. This is where you went to buy a fur coat. So passing by Swears and Wells, onwards to the Gallery Lafayette. And what is interesting about this incomer from France that opened in 1920 were the mannequins used. And these were flown over from Paris. They were by the Dutchman who lived in Paris, Pierre Imon, and he was doing something very different with mannequins. It hadn't been done before. He was trying to make them look like real people. And so it really began in the 20s, this dressing the shop window like a tableau, a scene. And so often the scenes were on a cruise liner, enjoying a cocktail or having a picnic. They were all shapes, sizes, characters, sort of mannerisms. When the store opened, great crowds gathered outside. They couldn't work out if there was a party going on in the windows maybe, or at night, was it haunted? So moving on up Regent Street, we come to the corner where Dickens and Jones has been reopened after its rebuild by Sir Henry Tanner. This was rather savaged by the architectural critics. There was a bit of everything going on here. Bit of France, bit of Egypt, bit of a theatre, this wonderful theatrical stairwell. And some 30s fashions to get us in that mood. Maternity fashions. So we emerge onto Oxford Street. And if you think the traffic is bad now, just have a look at this. This is a picture from the 30s. The pollution must have been intense. The noise, indescribable. And the pavements absolutely thronged, because this is known as the Golden Mile. It is the shopping epicenter, not just of London or of Britain, but it's figured of almost the world. It would rival perhaps, I don't know, Fifth Avenue in New York, but Americans come expressly to visit Oxford Street because the stores there are so phenomenal. And particularly in the 30s, let us imagine that it is the year of the coronation, 1937, and there's a new kid on the block. D.H. Evans, which is a Victorian store, has had a phenomenal rebuild, and building restrictions have been relaxed on Oxford Street. You can now go much higher than before, and you can see that it is towering above its neighbours. Very clever to open during this coronation year, and the brochure, which allegedly is to celebrate the coronation, is actually a brilliant piece of PR. And I managed to get hold of this brochure and see some of the pictures within to see how they were selling it. What was the offer? How was this going to be, as they called it, London's most modern shop? So it was designed by Louis David Blanc, Harrods architect. Here's the illustration. And, you know, it's a bit skyscraper-like. It's got these elegant, soaring, mullioned windows. That's what it really looked like. Steel frame, concrete floors, Portland stone, grey granite, flags are fluttering. The critics called it sort of German Art Deco, inspired by some of those great German department stores. And inside, well, people visited not just D.H. Evans, but London to see its escalator hall. 10 escalators, 5 floors, this great kind of showpiece atrium with these crisscrossing escalators going all the way up. Better than a fairground ride. People used to, young people, kids particularly, just ride them all day, just gazing and gawping. It was a place to be seen and a place to see. And you can see some of the interiors, and they're described in this brochure. And it does sound like a very sensory, opulent environment. The walls and pillars were of a delicate beige pink travertine marble. The floors were of polished cork. You can see that there, emitting a soft brown glow. The ceilings were in fibrous plaster in a modernistic design. You can just see that there. And then there was this sheen of metalwork on the stairs, on the escalators and the lifts, in silver and copper bronze, satin finished. I mean, why didn't they keep it? All this was purged in kind of dreadful, insensitive refurbs of the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And it closed, what was it? I think it had become House of Fraser, I think, and it closed during the pandemic. And it was, you know, a sorry sight by then. But let's just imagine that we're in it now. The interior designs were quite radical, what you might call the flow. Again, very different to that old Victorian or Edwardian model where a department store was a series of rooms because they had sort of grown by acquiring the properties next to them. They were rabbit warrens of rooms, all higgledy-piggledy crammed together. This was very much open plan. Huge space to wander around and look at the displays. Now, thinking about huge stores like D.H. Evans, they couldn't have worked without an absolute army of staff. And here are some of the heads of departments. And what I love about these pictures, they do look a little bit like a kind of Cluedo game, don't they? Or a sort of are you being served cast list. Each one, to me, a story. And looking at the age of some of them, they've been working in retail since the Victorian era. They are Victorians, and how they have to adapt to the new, to the modern. I mean, what must it be like suddenly in this store with its escalators and its kind of beauty salons? Maybe they rise to the challenge, they relish it. Maybe they just feel all at sea. Let's have a look at some of them here. Mr. Bisson. He looks quite scary. Floor coverings, 27 years. Miss Fiat in gloves for 46.5 years. I love that half. It matters. These are their worlds. And this one definitely out of Are You Being Served? Mr. Le Cornu in ladies outfitting for 47.5 years of service. I bet he was an absolute tartar. What I loved in my research was when I could sort of dig down into these ecosystems and try and get a little kind of flavour of what it was like to work there. And what if you were just an absolute kind of minion with these terrifying people bossing you? Was it very strict? Was it very restrictive? Was it boring? Was it exciting? And I did find various kind of unheard voices, if you like, that I brought back to life. And I particularly loved finding things like this, these letters. This is again from the same store. With a view to checking irregularities on the premises. It has been decided that the undermentioned buyers are authorised to check any assistant of any department or any of the outside staff for any breach of the rules of the firm or for any action which is likely to bring discredit to the firm, capital F. Yes, the wandering around. This must stop. Assistants are not allowed to just kind of browse as they will. They have to shop between certain times by arrangement. Otherwise, they have to remain at their places of work. And again, a house discount. A member of staff who is a widower ordered 2 ladies' coats and was expected to be given house discount. This is not to happen in the future. I do love all this because you just get a sense of what's really going on in these stores. I mean, they're all kind of fabulous looking front of house, these fantasy environments, particularly in their publicity material. But this kind of granular texture is the reality. And this fantastic picture is also the reality. This is from Harrods Dispatch Room, 1932 New Year sales. Harrods has a fantastic photographic archive. That's so detailed, so extraordinary that you can pretty much walk around the store at any era. And I spent a lot of time drooling over pictures from the Edwardian era of their shoe department, etc. So, who is treating their staff well? Just down the road, down Oxford Street, is another fabulous and phenomenal store. A store that was none too pleased with the relaunch of D.H. Evans with the grand opening in 1937, because this store had been the preeminent store up to that point, frankly, from its opening in 1909. Any ideas? These are the lift girls, and the man, the American who owned this store, he got rid of the term shop girl. He said it was demeaning. He rechristened them shop assistants, was very keen to support and employ women, was a real driver of women's emancipation, not just through the staff he employed, but by the genius stroke of opening the first ladies' lavatory in a department store. This is in 1909. No one had had that idea before. And so women could spend the day at Selfridges. Yes, very much an Edwardian building, trying to emulate a grand gallery or a museum. First department store to be built from the ground up in central London. He was not going to tear it all down and do a 30s rebuild, but there was something that Mr. Selfridge could do. Selfridges was all about pizzazz, display, wowing the shopper. It was about kind of sensory titillation on every level. So the outside of the store, and I wish we could see this picture in colour, always had to go one extra to outdo all those others on Oxford Street. I mean, so theatrical, so fabulous. And in 1930, a young landscape architect called Marjorie Allen, I'll just read from her autobiography. She'd followed a group of maintenance men to Selfridges out onto a vast grey expanse of roof, stretching from one end of Selfridges to the other. Now, Marjorie, who happened to be a cousin of Eric Gill, she was educated at Bedales, so she was quite sort of good imagination, quite a lot of drive. She wrote, "The sun was brilliant, the air fresh, and I thought with regret of all those sales girls, secretaries and office workers eating their lunch sandwiches in the dim recesses of the underworld. Why not put a few seats up here for them? Why not make a garden where they could enjoy some peaceful relaxation? Why not have an outdoor exhibition of sculpture, fashion shows, pitch and putt?" So she persuaded Harry Gordon Selfridge to allow her to design such a garden at minimal cost. And he said, "Anything that attracts people to my store is good for business. None of them will be able to resist spending a few shillings." And this is what happened. So suddenly Selfridge became this big draw on Oxford Street. So it was mightily, mightily miffed when in 1937 D.H. Evans opened a monster store down the road, but it didn't have a roof garden. They still had that. Roof gardens were very much a feature of the 30s. Again, this idea of kind of playgrounds for adults. And one of the most beautiful and famous and extraordinary of them all was, of course, Derry and Tom's. And if you are of a certain vintage and very lucky, you maybe will have been taken there as a child. And I do meet people who have memories of that. Or for that brief moment in the 70s, you would have gone to Big Bieber and experienced it. And what I found out was that while the landscape architect Ralph Hancock got all the acclaim and all the official histories and anything you might look at online for this amazing roof garden, and it was amazing. It was described as the kind of thing that a child would demand of its fairy godmother. 1.5 acres, was laid out in 1936 to 8. It had a Spanish garden based on the Alhambra in Granada, a Tudor-style garden, an English woodland garden with 30 species of trees and a flowing stream with carp, and pink flamingos picking their way delicately throughout. What I discovered was that all the planting was done by this young woman. She was a young horticultural student, and she tracked down Ralph Hancock. I think it was at Chelsea Flower Show, because she'd heard about this garden that was being built and planned, and she begged him. She said, please, please, can you use me? I would really like to be involved with this. And he thought, oh, cheap labour. And so she was paid an eye-wateringly low amount of shillings a week to do all the planting. Thousands of bulbs, thousands and thousands of bedding plants. She even brought up little stones from the river Thames that she, in her pockets, and added them to the English stream. Esme's photograph was sent to me by her family, who were mighty surprised to even discover that she'd had this role, because she's better known for being one of the founder members of the Soil Association. What a garden. I mean, way above the rumble and the traffic and the fumes of High Street Ken down below. It was said to be so peaceful, so tranquil, that a vicar used to come here once a week to write his sermon. Derry and Tom's, the building, was another fantastic deco rebuild. 1933, by Bernard George, who was then responsible for building Barker's next door. And you can just see the scaffolding there to the left as Barker's begins to go up. This is, again, decorated for the coronation. Quite muted, I say, compared to Selfridge's. This store was described, when it opened, the Daily Mail called it a dream palace for the coming generation. Again, we looked at the detailing on the outside, and I do urge you to go and look up at what is today M&S in Ken High Street. Beautiful detailing all the way around the outside of it. And inside, well, it must have been amazing. There were 8 lifts like this in onyx and black marble, with this beautiful kind of sinuous, again, Walter Gilbert, sort of bas-relief metalwork going on. Concealed lighting, walnut furniture, blue and gold carpets, and it was thought to be really a classic of English Art Deco design. It had a Lamson pneumatic tube system for carrying cash all the way around the building. Some people still remember that kind of thing, and it hung on to it way into its dotage, into the early 70s, when it was then taken over for a couple of years by Barbara Hulaniki. There she is with the flamingos, who are still alive. And look at that, the wonderful rainbow room. That's Twiggy in the rainbow room. It really played to that 70s vibe, this wonderful deco interior that Hulaniki could see that no one was valuing in the 70s. It had sort of really been mothballed and kind of ruined and ravaged. Although she said there were still people working there when it closed who did remember way back, who had been there for decades. So we've got three big stores on Kensington High Street. To the right, you've got Ponting's, House of Value, or House for Value. That was where you went to get your bargains. In the middle, you've got Derry and Tom's with its beautiful roof garden. And then Barker's, which was built subsequently by the same architect, Bernard George, but very differently. But I think they sit very well together. And the kind of creative impulse behind the rebuild was not Mr. Barker. He died during the First World War. It was Sir Sidney Skinner who took over, and he had lots of ideas about shopping, that it just had to change. It was now as much a recreation as a duty, and new buildings, new kind of palaces had to be built for the coming generation. Sorry, my dog was barking in the back. He said, "Make your staff love you and fear you in the same breath." Yes, so one of these men who absolutely populate the department store story. And his right-hand man was the chap who had the idea for the roof garden. He's the one who made the roof garden happen. Here he is. Trevor Bowen, a Welshman. He said, "The best advertisement is a woman's tongue." Don't really like that expression, but I know what he's trying to say. Once you've got the woman, once you've wooed the women, you need do no more, because word will spread. So let's have a look at Barker's. It was replacing this. This is what Kensington High Street used to look like, and it was an absolute bottleneck. So there was much campaigning in the great Barker's empire and other shop owners to widen the high street. But widening meant demolition. And actually, that was exactly what the Barker's empire wanted, because they wanted to rebuild with a nice wide pavement for window gazing. This was the plan with that sort of, I think, Bernard George, yeah, it's very different, and it embodies these bold changes in British taste of the early 30s, copying kind of European expressionist styles, this distortion of form for emotional effect. This is what got built. And I used to work within this store. The right-hand side, half of it, upper side, is owned by Associated Newspapers. I was a journalist in there. And I just sat in that office every day without any idea of the history of it. The address was Derry Street. I had no idea why. I thought it was something to do with Ireland. And researching this book has made me really cherish London's many high streets, and to stop looking at the kind of the windows of the endless chain stores that we're left with today, and start looking up at the architecture. And when you look up, especially as you come down Kensington Church Street here, it's hard not to go, wow, to see how the architecture coheres. And then you realize that these were department stores because of their heft, their grandeur. And I went into Whole Foods, which it is now, mostly down below, and you can just catch a glimpse of that. The vestiges, the last vestiges of Barker's, which was once such a high-end, cosseting, suave, gorgeous department store. Although by the time I was working there, it had got very fusty, it has to be said. That was around 2000. So to finish, let's go off to the suburbs. This is a tube map from the 30s, and have a look at some of the other brave, bold, new, audacious deco designs springing up around Greater London, vying with those in central London for trade. Here we go on a tube of the era. Shinners of Sutton, we had a look at that at the beginning. And again, so many people's memories, particularly anyone over, I don't know, 60 maybe, memories of department stores start in the cafes or the restaurants, special occasion places they were. Tea with an aunt or granny or mother, And it's just impossible to imagine something like this today, isn't it? I mean, we put all that kind of energy into restaurants, but not department stores. And I can't help feeling those that remain. Peter Jones is one, are missing a trick. If they could recreate something fabulous like this, that would be reason enough to go to the store. More details from Shinners. I mean, hard to believe it's Sutton. It was demolished and turned into a kind of red brick Woolworths. But it looks like something that a 30s film star might kind of shimmy down. This rather lovely picture was given to me by a friend, Caroline Morris. She's quite a well-known milliner. She's sitting on the left. This was the store that she grew up visiting, and it definitely honed her taste, her aesthetics, her love of design and fashion. And I think for so many people, first department store memories might look a little bit like this. And then Kennard's of Croydon, which absolutely embodied this crazy era for stunts. This is an all-female jazz band, and they just happen to have a pet cheetah sitting on the table. At Kennard's, they called it the store that sells to entertain and entertains to sell. There was always something mad going on at Kennard's. To, for example, advertise a jumbo sale, they hired 2 baby jumbo elephants and blocked the street by having one at either end. The police were called, but it was all great publicity. Or to publicise a special sale of stockings, they got a high kicker from the Folie Bergère to visit for a week, a mademoiselle, who could do, God knows, 100 kicks a minute or something in whatever the silk stockings were. These are Max and Moritz, who were their kind of in-house chimpanzee entertainers. Kennard's had a roof as well, and it was called The Playground in the Sky. It had Wild West shows and Punch and Judy and all sorts of extraordinary things going on up there. They were particularly good at wooing children, Kennard's. Bodger's of Ilford. This is its Deco annex. And yeah, who knew? I love the name Bodger's. That, well, no slur on Ilford, but something so kind of suave and beautiful popped up there in the 30s. In 1930, and this is an early example as well, sort of leading the way. See those Crittall windows. And Randall's of Uxbridge, RIP, recently closed, and this was a real time capsule. Been in the family for generations. What a wonderful fin in the middle there, a little bit like Barker's one. Saved from demolition because it's grade 2 listed. And this was just a very kind of local boy, William Eves, a kind of insignificant architect who would probably scratch his head to understand that this store has had such architectural value. Thank goodness to us today that it was saved. No longer a store. I think it's now been turned into luxury flats. And the RACS, the Royal Arsenal Cooperative Society, which gifted the capital with many interesting buildings. This is Tower House of 1933 in Lewisham. And it's got these rather little kind of jaunty bas reliefs of, I think, trains and boats going along the front. Again, this obsession with modes of transport. And then the RACS Woolwich, which was a gorgeous deco building. This is the dining room. This is a photo from the 60s, but the dining room still looking good. And then, sadly, again, that detail I showed you at the beginning there of the banisters spelling out RACS. That's pretty sad, isn't it? It fell into disrepair. It was closed. It was boarded up. And it was actually used in 1999 as an interior for a dystopian film called Children of Men. No, sorry, it was closed in 1999. The Children of Men was made in 2007. So the vandals had got in by then. And then it was threatened with demolition by Greenwich Council. Luckily, there was a very vibrant campaign to save it. And here it is today. Look at those faience tiles and that, those horizontal strips. They are luxury apartments, of course. And this brings me to the future of these now defunct, redundant department stores. Do we just demolish them? Like the M&S on Oxford Street, that's a 1920s building. Or is the greener solution to do something with them, to repurpose them somehow? And often that's hard to do because some of them are just they're so deep, they don't make for kind of easily carved up apartments. And imaginative thinking is required. I'm just going to end with this rather lovely little story from Peckham. Now, if you get out of the train station at Peckham, this wonderfully elaborate Victorian train station, you will probably have no idea, looking at the street, that right opposite you was once this phenomenal, suave, ebullient department store by T.P. Bennett, opened in 1935. Again, it's a rebuild of a Victorian model. Local people were asked to vote 3 designs of very different styles and vibes, and perhaps surprisingly, they went for this bit of modernism, and that the South London press described as exhilarating to look at with its clean, modernistic beauty. The store has been so designed throughout to have an almost irresistible appeal. So what happened to Holdren's? Yep, this is what you will see today. And I have walked past this shop many a time, and I've gone into it because you can always find something kind of extraordinary made of plastic in there that you just never knew you wanted. Cahn's Bargains. Have a look at those tiles, the faience tiles, the crittle windows, the shape of it. Go back again. Now, Mr. Cahn is an Afghani who came to Britain in 1999. He took a lease on this. He calls it Store of the People. And then he was contacted by a local architect, someone who's really passionate about saving these old buildings. In Peckham, he's got a wonderful name. He's called Benedict O'Looney. Benedict O'Looney is an obsessive. He'd be the first to say that. And he said, Akbar, do you know that this building was once this kind of fantastic Art Deco department store? And he said, I think that if we peel back these polystyrene ceiling tiles, we might just find something really amazing underneath them. So that is what they did. The 2 of them on step ladders with a couple of local Peckham guys helping. They started hacking away and peeling away. And this is what they revealed. It was completely boxed in. This is called lenscrete, this light well created by these discs of glass set into a concrete grid. Here is the man himself, Akbar Khan, and he is just delighted by what he's discovered. The people of Peckham, those that bother to look up, are amazed. It's a bit like a sort of magic box that's been opened, because there are so many more treasures yet to be uncovered. If a bit of funding can be had, but mostly it's by volunteers doing the work. And Akbar is now kind of leading a bit of a campaign for other Peckham stallholders to do similarly, if they're in a historic building, to let these features sing, to let a bit of that beautiful past that we've lost so much of back in, to let glamour back into the experience of shopping, even if all you're popping in for is a tin of lentils or a plastic bucket. Thank you very much for listening. I would love to answer any questions, or if any of you have got any kind of memories or reminiscences. I will pop back now to Lucy. There we go.
Wonderful, Tessa, that was absolutely brilliant. And it's been so lovely to see a few different people posting in the chat as well, some of their memories. It's about 7:28, so we've probably got time for a couple of questions, if that's all right, Tessa. And it looks like we have got a couple through. So first of all, hopefully you've all been able to see in the chat a couple of people. We've got Geraldine, we've got Tiff, John, a couple of people there sharing their memories of some of these department stores, which is absolutely wonderful, and their parents too. And then we've got a couple of questions that have come in. I'll do this one first. Apologies in advance with pronunciation. French is not my forte. So Tessa, you mentioned, is it Galerie Lafayette in your presentation? Were most of the products and items they sold imported, do you know?
Yes, they were flown in. They were flown in from Paris. They had dresses flown in daily. That was the lure, the attraction. It was going to bring Parisian pizzazz and glamour to the streets of London. So yes, I've just seen a quite nice question from, Charlotte, if you could bring back just one lost department store, which would it be? I would have loved to have gone to Kennard's of Croydon just for the sheer craziness of it. I think that would have been a lot of fun, but D.H. Evans is the one for me. And I went just before it closed for good, and I rode the escalator right up to the top, and I peered up into the recesses, and I could just see that moulded modernistic ceiling in the gloom. And I thought, what idiots. I mean, can you imagine if that existed today as it once was? What a draw that would be.
Absolutely, yeah, as I think Jackie had just said as well in the chat, just look up, as you say in your talk, just look up in these places and you'll see all sorts of wonderful things. I'm not sure if we've had any more questions come through, just lots of lovely comments from the audience. Oh, actually one more here from Rebecca. Why do you think so many of these amazing buildings became so run down? Just financial reasons, less spending power after World War II, or maybe something else?
I don't think after World War II, because they revived again. The 50s was a great era. I mean, even into the 70s. The 70s was when it all began to fall apart. Partly rising land values in London. The land they stood on was suddenly so much more valuable than whatever the business could turn over. That's why Gamages was destroyed, for example. Younger women didn't want to shop like their mothers anymore. Boutiques were on the rise. Department stores often were seen as a bit fusty unless they opened up at their own little boutique in the basement, and that's where Topshop started. That was an in-house boutique. Many reasons, you know, out of town shopping, parking, mega malls, blue water, parking particularly, and, you know, the internet being the death knell these days. Geraldine's asked me if I would like write a follow-up to include some of those stores you haven't included in your book club. Geraldine, there are 50 stores in here. This was a killer, but I am making a list. I am making a list because so many people have got in touch with their memories, and so many who have family connections as well, not just to the owners, but, you know, as workers. I think we are a nation of shoppers and shopkeepers. There are always great family anecdotes to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been lovely, as I say, to have seen some of those shared today. I think we've got literally one more question, if that's all right, everybody, and then we'll sign off for the evening. But it's been, yeah, a real treat for all of us. So one more from Jackie. How did the UK compare to, say, places like New York in terms of department stores, would you say?
Well, we've got a New Yorker here. Hello, Elise Rousseau. Well, when Gordon Selfridge came over to do a recce, he thought, I've got nothing to worry about here. These stores are just so, as my son would say, so dead. He thought they were really old-fashioned, really fusty. Oh my goodness. Yeah, we didn't lead the way, I would say, until Selfridge opened, and then everyone rushed to catch up and to somehow outdo Selfridges. So that set out a kind of ripple effect. And then British stores started to be renowned. They just kind of turned into these sumptuous palaces, Edwardian era, a big time. And then I think the interwar period, the 30s particularly. Bombed to smithereens, many of them in the Blitz, but they were not daunted. And many of them, I discovered, opened up for business with holes in their sides the next day, because they were part of Britain's DNA. They sort of symbolized our dauntless spirit.
Absolutely. Oh, wonderful.
It is sad, as Michelle says, to see so many stores closed and buildings destroyed. It's not just the architecture, it's the memories. And, you know, these were kind of hallowed grounds for so many people. This is where really, you know, seminal moments in people's lives happened. So, yeah, there is a great sadness, particularly for the older generation. And yes, you are right, life was better back then. If you're looking at it through the department store lens, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it feels like a very good note to end on. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much again to Tessa for such a wonderful talk. It's been absolutely fascinating to uncover the history of London's lost department stores, and I'm sure our audience feels the same. From the comments, it's clear to see everyone's really, really enjoyed this evening, and it seems like the time has flown by. Now, I'm just going to quickly share a link to our upcoming events in the chat box, and we hope to see you again soon. But for now, thank you so much to Tessa and to our marvellous audience for joining us this evening. And I hope you very much enjoy the rest of your night. So thank you so much. I'll send that.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for all your lovely comments. Okay.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.